Most people buy a Ring camera to feel safe. We like the idea of seeing who's at the door before we open it. But what if the person outside knows exactly where your camera can't see? And what if they're using that blind spot not to hide from you, but to wait for the perfect moment to step inside? This story might make you check your attic tonight. I've lived in this suburb for 3 years. It's the kind of place where nothing ever happens, where the most exciting thing in the neighborhood group chat is a complaint about someone's lawn being too long or a lost cat. I'm a freelance graphic designer, so I spend a lot of time alone in my home office, often working late into the night. Because I'm tucked away in the back of the house, I've always been a bit paranoid about what's happening at my front door. That's why I installed a Ring doorbell camera 6 months ago. At first, it was just for peace of mind, catching Amazon deliveries or the occasional solicitor. But lately, peace of mind is the last thing that camera has been giving me. It started on a Tuesday around 2:14 a.m. I was at my desk finishing up a layout for a client when my phone buzzed on the mahogany wood. The notification was simple: motion detected at your front door. I frowned. Usually, at that hour, it's just a stray cat or a gust of wind blowing a rogue leaf across the porch. I swiped the notification to open the live feed. The night vision kicked in, casting the porch in that grainy, ghostly green and gray hue. The porch was empty. I watched for a full minute. The street was silent. The oak tree in the front yard stood perfectly still. I figured it was a glitch, maybe a bug had crawled across the sensor. I put my phone back down and returned to my work. But exactly 10 minutes later, it buzzed again. Motion detected at your front door. This time, I didn't just glance at it. I sat up straight, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I opened the app. Again, the porch looked deserted. But as I was about to close the feed, I noticed something. At the very edge of the frame, on the far left where the brick pillar of my porch begins, there was a shadow. It wasn't a shadow cast by a tree or a street lamp. It was narrow, vertical, and it seemed to twitch. It was as if someone was standing directly against the wall, tucked into the 6-inch gap where the camera's wide-angle lens couldn't quite reach. I felt a cold prickle crawl up the back of my neck. I lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. There was no reason for anyone to be on my porch at 2:30 in the morning, let alone trying to hide from a camera they clearly knew was there. I stayed silent, holding my breath, staring at that tiny sliver of shadow. I wanted to use the two-way talk feature, to yell at them to get off my property, but something stopped me. A primal instinct whispered that if I spoke, I would be letting them know I was awake. I would be letting them know I was watching. After about 5 minutes of stillness, the shadow vanished. It didn't walk across the porch. It seemed to melt backward into the darkness of the side yard. I didn't sleep that night. I checked the locks on every window twice. I even dragged a chair into the hallway, facing the front door, and sat there with a kitchen knife in my hand until the sun started to bleed through the blinds. The next morning, I felt foolish. In the bright, suburban sunlight, the fear of the night seemed like a fever dream. I went outside to inspect the porch. I looked at the brick pillar. There were no footprints in the mulch, no scuff marks on the wall. I convinced myself I had overactive imagination, that the grainy night vision had just played tricks on my eyes. That was my first mistake. Wednesday passed without incident. Thursday was quiet. But on Friday night, the notifications started again. It was 3 a.m. sharp. No motion detected this time. Instead, my phone gave the distinct chime of someone actually pressing the doorbell. Ding dong. The sound echoed through the silent house, loud as a gunshot. I jumped so hard I nearly knocked my monitor over. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I opened the camera feed. The porch was empty, but the doorbell had been pressed. I looked at the recording. The video started the moment the button was pushed. There was no one in sight, But right at the beginning of the clip, for just a fraction of a second, I saw a pale, thin hand reach out from the left side of the frame, from that same blind spot, tap the button, and instantly retract. They weren't trying to break in, not yet. They were playing with me. I retreated to my bedroom and locked the door, dialing the local police non-emergency line. I felt like an idiot explaining it. Someone is ringing my doorbell, but hiding from the camera.
The officer was polite, but dismissive. Probably just some teenagers, sir. Bored kids on summer break. We'll send a cruiser to do a drive-by if one is in the area. A cruiser did come by about 20 minutes later. I watched the blue and red lights flash faintly against my bedroom walls through the gaps in the curtains. I felt a temporary surge of relief. The police were here. Surely whoever was lurking had been scared off. I watched the cruiser disappear down the street on my Ring feed. I waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Then the notification popped up again. Motion detected at your front door. I opened the feed, my blood turning to ice. The person was still there, tucked in the blind spot, but this time they had left something. Centered perfectly in the middle of my doormat was a small, dark object. It hadn't been there when the police drove by.
I peered at the screen, trying to make out what it was. It looked like a piece of paper or a photograph. I knew I shouldn't go out there. Every horror movie logic told me to stay behind the locked door, but the need to know, the need to see what they had placed on my doorstep was overwhelming. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and my phone. I crept to the front door, my heart hammering against my teeth. I looked through the peephole. The porch looked clear. I unlocked the deadbolt as quietly as possible, cracked the door just an inch, and snatched the object off the mat before slamming and locking the door again. I retreated to the kitchen light to look at it. It was a Polaroid photo. The chemicals were still slightly damp, the image still developing. As the colors sharpened, my stomach dropped.
It was a photo of the back of my house. Specifically, it was a photo of my office window. In the picture, you could clearly see me sitting at my desk, my back to the window, illuminated by the glow of my computer screen. The photo had been taken from the woods behind my fence. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was the date and time scrawled in black marker at the bottom of the white frame. Tuesday, 2:14 a.m., the exact moment I had received the very first notification. They hadn't been on my porch that night. They had been in the woods, watching me watch the empty porch. And if they were at the front door now, who was at the back?
The Polaroid felt heavy in my hand, like a piece of lead. My breathing was shallow, coming in short, ragged gasps that sounded way too loud in the empty kitchen. My eyes were glued to the photo, to the back of my own head, sitting at that desk, completely oblivious to the person standing in the dark woods. The Polaroid felt heavy in my hand, like a piece of lead. My breathing was shallow, coming in short, ragged gasps that sounded way too loud in the empty kitchen. My eyes were glued to the photo, to the back of my own head, sitting at that desk, completely oblivious to the person standing in the dark woods, just yards away. Then, the realization hit me like a physical blow. If that photo was taken on Tuesday from the backyard, but they were at my front door tonight, they were circling me. I stood frozen in the center of the kitchen, the linoleum cold beneath my bare feet. I turned off the kitchen light. I didn't want to be a silhouette. I didn't want to be a target.
Suddenly, my phone vibrated again. I nearly screamed. It was another Ring notification. Motion detected at your front door. I didn't want to look. I was terrified of what I'd see, but I had to. I swiped the screen. The porch was empty again, but the object on the mat, the first Polaroid, was gone. In its place was a second photo. I didn't go out to get this one. I didn't have to. I zoomed in on the live feed. Even in the grainy night vision, I could see what it was.
It was a photo of the front door I was currently standing behind. But in the photo, the door was slightly ajar. My heart stopped. The photo showed the door cracked open, just the way I had held it 30 seconds ago when I reached out to grab the first picture.
They were right there, right now. I backed away from the door, moving toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. I needed to get to a room with a sturdier lock, but as I passed the bathroom, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound. It wasn't coming from the front door. It wasn't coming from the back window. It was coming from above. I looked up at the rectangular wooden panel in the hallway ceiling, the access hatch to the attic. It was shifting, just a fraction of an inch, as if something heavy was shifting its weight directly on top of it. A cold sweat broke out over my entire body. I realized they were right there, right now. I backed away from the door, moving toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. I needed to get to a room with a sturdier lock, but as I passed the bathroom, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound. It wasn't coming from the front door. It wasn't coming from the back window. It was coming from above. I looked up at the rectangular wooden panel in the hallway ceiling, the access hatch to the attic. It was shifting, just a fraction of an inch, as if something heavy was shifting its weight directly on top of it. A cold sweat broke out over my entire body. I realized with a sickening jolt why the motion notifications were so inconsistent, why they seemed to disappear into a blind spot. They weren't disappearing into the yard, they were climbing. There was a trellis on the side of the brick pillar, strong enough to hold a person's weight, leading straight to the roofline and a small ventilation window near the attic.
I didn't wait. I ran for the garage door, the only exit I felt I could reach before whatever was in the ceiling came down. I fumbled with the heavy manual lock, I didn't wait. I ran for the garage door, the only exit I felt I could reach before whatever was in the ceiling came down. I fumbled with the heavy manual lock, my fingers slick with sweat. Thud! The attic hatch hit the floor behind me. I didn't look back. I threw the garage door open, sprinted past my car, and hit the button for the main garage door. The motorized groan of the door opening felt like it took an eternity. I squeezed through the gap before it was even halfway up and sprinted into the middle of the street. I didn't stop until I was under the brightest street lamp in the cul-de-sac. I turned around, gasping for air, my phone already dialing 911 again. My house looked peaceful. It looked like every other house on the block, quiet, dark, suburban. But then, my phone chimed one last time. A final notification.
I looked at the screen. It was a person-detected alert. The camera was recording. In the video, the front door of my house slowly opened from the inside. A figure stepped out onto the porch. They were tall, wearing a shapeless, dark hooded sweatshirt and medical masks over their face. They didn't look like a monster or a ghost. They looked like a person, a very real, very calculated person. The figure walked to the center of the porch and looked directly into the Ring camera. They didn't speak, they didn't wave. They simply reached into their pocket and pulled out a final Polaroid. They held it up to the lens so I could see it clearly on my phone. The photo was of me, standing under the street lamp, looking back at the house, holding my phone to my ear. The photo had been taken from the roof.
The figure dropped the photo, turned around and walked back into my house, closing the door behind them. The police arrived 4 minutes later. They swarmed the house with canine units and flashlights. They searched every inch, the attic, the crawl space, the closets. They found nothing. Well, not nothing. They found the attic hatch open. They found the trellis on the side of the house slightly pulled away from the brick. And they found a neat pile of Polaroids on my kitchen table. There were dozens of them. Some dated back months. Photos of me sleeping. Photos of me eating dinner, photos of me talking on the phone. They had been living in the attic for weeks, coming down while I was at the grocery store or in the shower,
documenting my life like a scientific study.
The police never caught them. There were no fingerprints, the person had worn gloves, there was no DNA. I moved out the next day. I didn't even take all my furniture. I just packed a bag and left. I live in a high-rise apartment now in the city with 24-hour security and no attic. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed and the room is silent, I'll get a phantom vibration in my hand. I'll think about that Ring camera, and I wonder if somewhere in another quiet suburb, a green-tinted camera is watching a blind spot, waiting for a shadow that knows exactly where to hide.